what can we associate with early music? Depending on the definition, the term covers relatively large spans of time, usually referring to the medieval, Renaissance and Baroque periods of Western music. How can we know what the music of that time sounded like when performed live, since we obviously have no recordings, only the written scores? Do the musicians of our time have the ability to play it as it was originally performed? The exploration of early music is an intriguing venture. The initial prejudices will inevitably give way to the new, inspiring perspectives of this music, which was written some 300 or 400 years ago. I had the pleasant opportunity of speaking to the early music ensemble Harmonia Antiqua Labacensis and of listening to their rehearsal for the Festival Radovljica, the oldest festival of early music in Slovenia. Please join me on the journey through the many beauties of early music.
Why revive old music when contemporary music abounds? Well, the music might have been written ages ago, but it carries a message that remains valuable throughout the course of time. The scores are old, but not the music itself. Today's performances of early music are inspiring, a delight to listen to, and paradoxically sound quite new in their own way. First, let us have a look at what the term early music relates to.
When it was first used in the 18th century or so, it meant that the composers are already dead. And this is true for most composers today, for most composers that are played very often in concerts. And I think today it's much more broader. I mean, we have music from the Middle Ages and then Renaissance, and mostly it's Baroque music. But of course, we also have music from the classical period, played on appropriate instruments, that is on instruments for which the music was written for. And also today, even 20th century music is sometimes played on period instruments, so it somehow gets into the same field, and you could say that's early music as well.
The idea of early music is to go back to every time. It's not only, in our case, it's Baroque music, but the same applies to Middle Ages, Renaissance, etc. Now the movement goes back also, or goes forth to Haydn, classical, romantic, even to Wagner. The idea behind is that if we try to go to these roots, what the composers intended to do, what the audience expected to listen, then we are able, it might sound as a paradox, but we might be able to make a more contemporary message, since it allows us to understand what we are supposed to say.
I mean, early music is not a homogeneous thing. We have, of course, it has sacred music, church music, and also other music like for banquets, or also there was folk music. We don't know how it sounded, but of course there was much more music that was improvised and so on. And so we shouldn't take early music as something that exists. It's just an idea we have when we think about early music. I don't know, I mean, perhaps it's not always liturgical music, but that it was sometimes sung at private devotion, so not only at Mass, but also in the chamber.
How does early music differ from classical, contemporary or romantic music in terms of style and performance? What does it have to offer to the musicians and the audiences from a subjective standpoint?
I think as a singer, the music from the Baroque period is more instrumental and more virtuosic, and paints the text in a different way with lots of color, with ornamentation. And nowadays music is much more monosyllabic. It paints each individual word and it has less chance for virtuosity.
Maybe it's the first time in history that it is like that we can hear music of all different periods, because former they always just wanted to hear new music. Yeah, music which was written 15 years ago was already old, and we are playing music which is 400 years old. So that's, I think, a very new matter of fact. And the difficulty, if we try to play it in a manner how it was played before, is that we always have to change language. So, for example, if I just look at the 18th century, I have a different language every 10 or 20 years. And we never will get it like a mother language, because it's always learned. That's the difficulty about that.
The difference between playing classical music and old music for me is that in classical music it's a lot more, I should say, intense, but I mean it in a very good way, because when I play old music then I suddenly feel this peace inside, you know, there is a lot less vibrato or almost no vibrato, and I mean it's very intense music, of course, in its own way, but really different than the classical perception. So I always like to do it because it always sort of puts me down to earth as a musician. So I start to think differently and also feel differently, and as a result of that I also play differently, and it's a magnificent feeling.